49ers were the best team in the NFL. Very few people could argue that fact. And then me and you, Nick, have had people on this show, at least 3 people, if I remember correctly, said that the Minnesota Vikings were going to end up with the number 1 pick in the draft because they were going to be the worst team in the NFL this year. So we have people almost, saying the best team versus the worst team. And, to quote Boomer, that's why you play the game. That's why you put the chin straps on, and you got to see every Sunday, what's going to happen. And Christian, I can't say, people wonder, did the Vikings win this game or did the Niners lose this game? Obviously, the Niners didn't play that great, but you really have to give this one to the Vikings. Christian Ponder put together one of his best games since being a Minnesota Viking. He showed the talent of being a first-round draft pick, and he played great. 21 of 35 for 198 yards, 2 touchdowns. They don't jump off the screen there, and he also added another 33 yards and a touchdown on the ground. So Christian Ponder playing a great game and leading the Vikings to a win, and it was definitely great to see if you're a Vikings fan or if you're just a fan of the underdog.
And honestly, with Christian Ponder, he played this entire game without the production that we're used to seeing out of Adrian Peterson, a premier running back that can provide a big spark for a team when need be. He was practically out of the game with under 4 yards a carry. Christian Ponder put the team on his back with 2 passing touchdowns, added another one in the running game, 3 total TDs for this guy, and if it weren't for a last-second rally for Andrew Luck and the Indianapolis Colts, the Minnesota Vikings partner 3-0 on the season. They're currently 2-1, and after a big win against a premier football team in the Niners, certainly will go deep in the playoffs despite this big loss. For San Francisco, certainly they have a threat within their conference. Minnesota shaking some heads over in the NFC. I know it's still early, but for San Francisco, certainly in some big-time trouble, and Minnesota proving to be one of those big-time early teams that may shake some heads over in the NFC.
Yeah, you look at the 49ers, and if anything, this will wake them up, and because they've had nothing but success this year with all their signing of Randy Moss and their signing of a few more receivers and, beating the Packers in week 1 and just, going off to an start. I think this will almost wake them up and bring them down to earth. I wouldn't be surprised if the Niners are actually more dangerous than they are now. But as far as, you're saying with the Packers, they might have a little competition in that division with Minnesota playing better than people thought. With Detroit, they're going to be a threat for a while. And even if Chicago doesn't have a good record, they always play tough within that division, so you never know what can happen there. I think wins like this is what keep the NFL interesting. You can never really count a team out until it's 000 on the scoreboard.
And for the San Francisco 49ers, obviously ranked among the top 2 or 3 teams in the league until this game. But for San Francisco, honestly, now it proves a big question over there on the offensive side of the ball. It's all about, obviously, how can this offense kind of get into a rhythm throughout the entire year? They acquire Randy Moss. Now this is supposed to be a dominant team that can throw and run the football. Obviously didn't have the kind of balance you wanted to out of the Minnesota Vikings in this game, but you have to shake your head about now question the defense, because after 3 games, they only once do not allow more than 20 points, and the offense for San Francisco, it's one of those things where they do have to put some points on the scoreboard. Minnesota shreds them up and down the field, and the San Francisco defense was completely out of rhythm. And now the offense for San Francisco seemingly has to put up points every single week. If not, the defense just might come through in the clutch. So right now for the Niners at 2-1, a lot of question marks heading into their next matchup at New York City.
Yeah, you look at that defense, and really when you look at the numbers, you notice, Christian Ponder did not throw for over 200 yards. And as you said earlier, Adrian Peterson did not have that great of a game. So really the way you got to look at it is I think Minnesota just made the best of their opportunities. They didn't go up and down the field the entire game. Christian Ponder didn't throw for 400 yards. They just made the best of their opportunities when they got in the red zone. They made it count, things like that. One of Christian Ponder's touchdowns, they did say, if you watch the game to Kyle Rudolph, it looked like offensive pass interference that was not called, which could have been a huge swing, of that touchdown. So really, I don't know that the defense played horrible. I think Minnesota just seized the moment and made the opportunities, count when they had them. Because as you say, you look at it, and Ponder under 200 yards, Adrian Peterson not having that great of a game. So when you look at it that way, I don't think you have to worry about the Niners defense, because overall I think this team's going to have a wake-up call after this past Sunday.
Christian Ponder played a heck of a game, not statistically, but did take advantage of the opportunities when need be. Minnesota, certainly one of those teams that if they keep winning like this, they perhaps can be the team of the future. This was supposed to be one of the most under-talented squads, but at 2-1, watch out for Minnesota. And for San Francisco, things not looking so hot, but this is still a tremendous ball club. Next week, they travel to New York to take on the Jets. So coming up next on this presentation of NFL Goal Line is J.J. Watt, set for defensive MVP in the entire NFL. He's certainly on pace to do just that. We'll have more on tap about Houston football, and then we'll also take a look at all of Week 3 action as the 3 straight overtime games at the 1 o'clock slates on week number 3 was certainly entertaining. We'll be back after a 30-second timeout. This is the NFL Goal Line with Nick Rice and Phil Nunziata. Welcome back to the NFL Goal Line, presented by Nick Rice and Phil Nunziata. And Phil is my co-host for this game, and we'll get his insight on the J.J. Watt scenario, as right now with 5.5 sacks, certainly one of those favorites to be the defensive MVP. He's second in the league in that category, and the Houston defense first in the NFL against the pass. Certainly J.J. Watt has been a huge part of it, as he has a tremendous upper hand. And right now, for this defensive player in his second year, already being one of the premier defensive linemen in the National Football League, I didn't see this coming, Phil, but right now, with 5.5 sacks and completely dominating on the defensive side of the ball, everything looks good for this young defensive lineman heading into his second year.
Well, when I think of J.J. Watt, really, even before this year, I remembered him, getting a pick six in their, or it was a fumble recovery for a touchdown in their playoff game, Houston's first playoff win. And you look at, Houston 3-0 for the first time, not saying much because they're not that old of a team, but 3-0 for the first time, you can definitely say J.J. Watt has a lot to do with it. The numbers don't even necessarily speak volumes. Here's a guy, he has 15 tackles on the year, and as you said, 5.5 sacks, only a second in the league, only a half sack behind Casey Matthews. Of course, he's playing right now, so that might be spread out a little bit more. But you look at this game, and this guy has just improved. This is his third year in the league, and to think that a third-year guy has a legitimate shot at defensive MVP just shows you the talent that this guy has. And the past 2 years, he has 11 career sacks, and last year he had 5.5 sacks total for the whole year, and he's already at that point with 3 games. So it'll be interesting to see how many he racks up by the time this season's over, which looks like, if he keeps up with this pace, is a surefire Pro Bowl season for him.
Jared Allen, certainly, he tied the record last year with 22 sacks. J.J. Watt, let's do the math right now. He's on pace for over 35 sacks. Certainly one of those pass rushers that can get after the quarterback. Doesn't have the statistics in the run-stopping category that you would expect out of J.J. Watt, but just watching him on tape, he could have even 7 or 8 sacks after week 3. He's just one of those defensive guys that can get after the football. Sorry for a little background noise here, but right now, J.J. Watt, one of those surefire favorites to being representing the defensive side for MVP. And right now, no MVP certainly on Seattle's side as we expect after week 3, but one of those upsets in the making, Green Bay having a second half comeback, at least an attempt here, but Seattle, what do you have on this game, Phil, midway through the third?
Moments ago, Green Bay actually kicked a 29-yard field goal, bringing the score 3-7 here, with Seattle still leading. And I also wanted to correct myself. This is J.J. Watt's second year in the league, not his third. But we look at this, we have 8:07 left in the third quarter in that game, and the Packers kicking a field goal, cutting it to 4. So this game definitely isn't out of reach. It's definitely close enough for both teams. So I would not be surprised to see the Packers come back. But, you can't count out the Seahawks. Their defense has played great. So it'll be interesting to see how this game continues on.
Well, for J.J. Watt, he's certainly playing even more like his 6th or 7th year. Certainly one of those premier defensive linemen. 7-3 score with the Seattle Seahawks leading over the Green Bay Packers, a favorite to win that game. But we'll have more updates heading over into the third and fourth quarter. We are just getting started here on NFL Goal Line with Nick and Phil. Let's head over to perhaps the biggest game of the afternoon. It ended up last night with a 31-30 win, Baltimore over New England, that is, and it ended up in perhaps the most controversial play of the weekend that's saying a lot of that's having big noise here as the game ends on a controversial field goal attempt. Phil, what do you have on this game that ended in perhaps more controversy and fines off the field than play on the field?
Well, me and you were talking about this game even before the show started. There's definitely a lot to talk about, but none more important, than the situation with Baltimore Ravens wide receiver Torrey Smith. He got a phone call at little after midnight last night, finding out that his 19-year-old brother was killed in a motorcycle accident. You assume that he's not going to play in this game, that he's going to fly home, see his family. He was given that option with no penalty, obviously, by Harbaugh and the rest of the Ravens organization. Decides to stay, plays through the game, and has a game to remember. He has 6 catches for 127 yards and 2 touchdowns. Just amazing to see. You almost think back to, Brett Favre playing the day after, his father died against the Oakland Raiders all those years ago. It's a very similar situation, very emotional game. The field goal that we're going to get to later that may or may not have went in to win this game, unless you're a Patriot fan, obviously, you're still pulling for that to happen because you wanted it to happen for Torrey Smith. And just a very emotional and a very impressive performance by the Ravens wideout.
Torrey Smith, reading off the stats, 6 receptions, 127 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Joe Flacco's obvious go-to guy. He was the leading receiver for the Ravens in this big win. And for the Patriots defense, no one could stop this guy, and you're rooting for that. As after such an emotional game, even after the game, in the post-game, and then the Ravens gave him the game ball, just an emotional night and an emotional day all around for this big play receiver, and the Ravens certainly have a number one guy in Torrey Smith. And throughout the entire game, it was one of those scenarios, a game-winning kick scenario for the Baltimore Ravens, and it ended up being a game that was perhaps more controversial than it needed to be, as the Patriots call a timeout. Here's the scenario. A 30-yard attempt for the Ravens kicker, Jay Tucker, out of he's a rookie here for the Baltimore Ravens, and he had a chance to win the game. And it ended up a 30-yard attempt, calling a timeout on a game or on a kick that ended up right down the middle. Patriots call a timeout. One more chance for the Ravens kicker to be a hero in this game, and the chip shot field goal was angled right to the right side, and in perhaps one of the most controversial plays of the weekend. It looked to me, Phil, like it was an obvious no-good kick. But something, I'm not superstitious that much, but in this game, it certainly seemed like there was a little on Torrey Smith and the Ravens' side, as the referees called a good field goal. You cannot review the play, and the game is over, partner, and the Ravens win 31-30. And for New England, now on their side, Belichick, their main man, might be fined. And for the Baltimore side, certainly an emotional win, and now at 2-1, things are looking up for the upstart Ravens.
Yeah, first you talked about Justin Tucker, the rookie kicker out of Texas for the Baltimore Ravens. This is his 3rd game in the NFL, and he's yet to miss a kick. Playing the Eagles last week, I know how good this guy could be. He kicked a 51, 56, and 48-yard field goals, respectively, and this guy was just clutch. None of his kicks were they were all right down the middle. He didn't have any close wide right, wide left. And, as we were talking about before we got on the air here about this field goal, the way you have to envision it is you got to, imagine that the uprights are still there. So you have to look at the angle that ball, crossed over the uprights, which, at that point weren't there anymore. And you have to look at it, and you almost kind of wonder, okay, does it hit the bar? If it does it roll inwards? Does it bounce out? You're never really going to know unless maybe they think they need to make the bars higher, in the next coming years to eliminate this problem if it becomes a continuing problem. But really, when you look at it, there's almost no way. You look at it from the original view and you think it's good. But then, you see the zoomed in view and you're like, oh, who knows? But really, there's no way to remedy that problem unless you make the goalpost higher or you come up with some, sensor on the top of them. It's getting way out there to decide if it crosses it or not. But overall, it's definitely controversial. And you already mentioned, Bill Belichick snapping at the referees, and he's, as good as fined, I'm sure, here within the next couple days. But, overall, as I said, unless you're a Patriots fan, it was a happy ending for you because you wanted to see it happen for Torrey Smith.